Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootleggers, shills, dead slayers, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome, and let's go to Syria, or as Zionists call it, Israel. And I'm talking about the Golan Heights. And there's been interesting developments there as well recently that kind of go in line with some of the other things that have been happening, including the Kurds declaring a federation of northern Syria in Syria, as well as the fact that John Kerry has talked about Plan A and Plan B, and one of them involves dividing up Syria. And of course, I've done a number of videos on the possibility that these areas could be destabilized and broken up, including Iraq and Syria and other countries in the region as well. But one of the people who are one of the players, certainly, that's involved in this process, as I've mentioned before, that no one wants to discuss is Israel. And as we know, Israel's also licking its chops on the demise of Syria, and part of their contribution to the assault on Assad and the destabilization of Syria, something they've been a part of since the beginning and have a lot to gain from, is because then they get to permanently keep the Golan Heights, which they've occupied since 1967. And this is a pretty big deal because the occupation of the Golan Heights and this huge chunk of Syria has not been recognized by the international community. And Israel, of course, is hoping that this war will facilitate them permanently breaking off this chunk of Syria and creating a larger Israel. And it's pretty interesting because now we have Israel very much taking advantage of the situation to do just that. Apparently, the last couple of years they've been moving ahead with plans to drill for oil in the Golan Heights, and has been claiming that as long as as long as Syria is distracted by this war, that they have the right to consolidate their position in Golan Heights, and that's what they've been doing the last few years. And this is accelerated because Israeli oil exploration found oil in the Golan Heights in 2015, and so all this exploratory drilling has paid off, and now the Israeli government has given the rights to companies to drill for more oil in the Golan Heights, even though technically it's still part of Syria. So, but it really gets interesting when you look at the details. But first, a little background history. 1967, Israel occupied the Golan Heights and expelled most of the Syrian population. 130,000 people were removed, and over 200 villages were destroyed. And I know there's a lot of perception out there that Israel was the poor victim and that Syria and all these other Arab countries stormed down on this poor defenseless country, but that's not exactly how the facts play out. Certainly in documentation, that's the narrative that's been created by the United States and Israel, but the actual narrative is that Israel set up a trap and encouraged this invasion and achieved exactly the goals they wanted, which was the annexation and appropriation of all sorts of land in that region. And so now in the Golan Heights, we have 30 Israeli settlements, all against international law. And then in 1981, Israel formally annexed the Golan Heights, which has also never been recognized by international law, including the United States. And in 2006, the UN reaffirmed Syria's rights over the Golan Heights in light of this unfolding situation. And even according to all international law and the United Nations and the Hague regulations, all these resources are not available to Israel at this point until the international law challenges to the occupation of Golan Heights have been resolved. So in light of that, in 2011, a mere 5 years ago, of course, Israel's courts negated international law and gave Israel all rights over the Golan Heights. So that's where we are right now, historically. And so now, as I say, Israel is jockeying for position in order to get their piece of Syria once the dust settles. And in fact, apparently, reportedly at these meetings between Obama and Netanyahu, it's been a top issue for Netanyahu, saying that it's time that the status of the Golan Heights were changed due to the war. And there's been further calls by Israeli officials for just the out complete annexation and integration of Golan Heights into Israel. But to get it a little more seedy, let's look at some of the details that this article provided about this particular oil company that's operating in the Golan Heights, because it makes it all the more clear what's going on and why we have this agenda in the Middle East and in Syria. And it's an Israeli company, oil company called AFEC, and they are a subsidiary of a U.S. company called Genie Energy. And the advisory board for AFEC includes Dick Cheney, Rupert Murdoch, and Larry Summers. So no surprise to find somebody like Dick Cheney, who is involved in orchestrating all these policies, U.S. policies in the Middle East, who stands to gain financially off of his involvement there. And certainly Rupert Murdoch, running Fox News and being a cheerleader for all the wars and being so pro-Zionist. Of course, he is going to make some money off of this deal as well. And most interesting is the guy who runs AFEC in this oil company in Golan Heights. His name is Effie Item. And not only is he a far-right politician, but he's also a former Israeli general. That's one of the things you find about Israeli cronyism, is that there's a lot of interest in perpetuating the war and the war economy, because so many of these generals, Israeli generals and ex-military people, are well positioned in the Israeli economy, as anyone would suspect, having an economy based on war. And therefore, this policy of Israel is sustained by the likes of this guy, Effie Item. And incidentally, he's also an Israeli settler in Golan, so he has a lot personally to gain. He probably owns some of the land that the oil is being explored on. But he also said in 2004, when he was the Israeli housing minister, referring to the Palestinians, that, quote, "we have to kill them all," unquote. So great guy to be dealing with up there in the Golan Heights. And certainly his view of the rights of Syria are going to be somewhat biased. So there we have it. Israel licking its chops, getting ready to get their chunk of Syria as well. And I brought that up before in other videos, because inevitably, with the destabilization of Syria and the discussion of breaking it up, certainly Israel would not miss out on its chance to get some more land out of the deal, and certainly the Golan Heights, which they've wanted to have for, well, 100 years. So I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?